Good morning, everyone. My name is Katie Rogers, and I am the Knowledge Exchange Manager at YouthREX. Welcome to the first part of a two-part webinar series, Engaging Youth in Program Design and Development. Will be followed up with part two in a couple of weeks, focusing on engaging youth in evaluation. We're really excited about this topic. Youth engagement is something that we think a lot about at YouthREX, and we work with a lot of organizations across Ontario that also care very much about meaningfully engaging youth. So we're really looking forward to today's conversation. We want to start with a land acknowledgement. YouthREX's provincial office is located at York University. Both YouthREX and York University acknowledge their presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Métis. It is now home to many Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge the current treaty holders and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. A few things to keep in mind for today's webinar. We are recording this webinar and it will be uploaded to both of our websites, the YouthREX website and to the Exchange for Youth Work. If you have any trouble with audio quality, please try calling in with a phone. In your control panel, you'll see that you're able to ask questions and share comments throughout today's webinar. We really look forward to hearing from you, so please be sure to share your comments and ask your questions. There will be time towards the end of the formal presentation and conversation for questions. You can also tweet us at Rex for Youth and follow the hashtag #YREXWeb. A few things about YouthREX before we get into today's webinar. YouthREX is the Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, and our vision is an Ontario where shared knowledge is transformed into positive impact for all youth. And our mission is to make research evidence and evaluation accessible and relevant to Ontario's youth sector through knowledge exchange, capacity building, and evaluation leadership. We have a presence in different areas of Ontario. So our provincial office, where we are broadcasting from today, is at the School of Social Work at York University. We also have a northern hub at Laurentian University, an eastern hub at Carleton University, a southwestern hub at King's University College at the University of Western Ontario, and we have a community hub in Windsor in partnership with the United Way of Windsor, Essex. We do the work that we do at YouthREX through knowledge exchange, which includes opportunities like today's webinar, through YouthREX Ed, which includes all of our capacity building work, including our online and in-person certificates and workshops to support youth workers across Ontario, and youth program supports, which is a comprehensive suite of services that we provide to youth programs and youth organizations in Ontario to help support and strengthen evidence-informed youth work. Today's guests for our webinar on engaging youth meaningfully in program design and development, we have Jithusha, who is a youth research assistant at our provincial office and also the founder and executive director of Light, and Stephanie, who is our youth program supports manager and works with us here at the provincial office. And our panelists include Lena, who's based in Windsor, community builder, youth advocate, and law student, and Adam, who is a volunteer coordinator at Christie Lake Kids in Ottawa. We're really looking forward to today's conversation. We encourage you to get involved, to send your questions and comments. And right now, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, who is going to take it from here.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today for part one of our series on engaging youth. We're going to take a look today at a few different things. Firstly is just youth engagement in general. What does it mean? We'll then move into a visualization exercise, defining youth engagement. The next piece is looking specifically at engaging youth in program planning. So what are the benefits of engaging youth in program planning? Different levels of youth participation. We'll move into some reflective questions for all of our attendees to share some perspective on where they're at in their youth engagement journey. And then finally, we'll take a look at youth engagement in practice. And then at the end, we'll open up our panel discussion to really share some learning around working with youth, some good practices for engaging youth in the program planning process, and what's worked well for people along the way. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague JJ just to lead us in a visualization exercise. And I might need your support, Katie, with passing this off.
Hello? Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to begin by asking that you close your eyes as I start to take you back to the time when you were a young person in school. Think about getting up in the morning. What time is it? Does someone wake you up? Who? Do you get up easily or is it a pain? What is your morning routine? Do you take a shower? Oh, let me just turn on my cam. Oh, here. Okay. Let me just begin again, actually. So yeah, I'm going to ask again by beginning that you close your eyes as I take you back to a time you were a young person in school. Think about getting up in the morning. What time is it? Does someone wake you up? Who? Do you get up easily or is it a pain? What is your morning routine? Do you take a shower, bath, or do your hair? What are you wearing? Are you ready in a few minutes? An hour? Who else is around in the morning? Do you have to help anyone else get ready? Now you leave for school. How do you get there? Bus, drive, get a ride, walk, bike. Do you go with others? What does the building look like? How do you feel about the place? What do you do when you first get inside? Do you go to your locker? Hang out with friends? Who are your friends? How do you feel about them? What is your first class of the day? Who teaches it? Do you like the subject? Do you like the teacher? What are your favorite classes? What classes do you dislike? Why? What about lunch? Where do you eat? What did you eat? Do you have any meetings? Now it is the end of the school day. Do you play a sport? Have an activity? Have a job? Do your homework? Hang out with friends? What adults do you encounter? Coaches, advisors, administrators, or bosses? When do you get home? Do you eat dinner with your family? Do you do your homework or pretend to do your homework? Do you watch TV? Talk on the phone? What time do you go to bed? How do you feel at the end of the day? Now you can open your eyes and return back to the present time. I understand that the exercise may have reminded you of some painful or personal memories and perhaps some humorous ones too. So please take a few seconds to reflect if need be. I'm going to ask you to take a moment to examine your current involvement throughout your community. Think about the neighborhood groups, clubs, committees, boards, religious groups, friends, family, and volunteer work you do. Now imagine being a young person doing that work. Remember back to the visualization and what it was like to be a teenager. How would it affect your current community involvement if you had no desk, no way to take phone calls for most of the day, probably limited access to a computer and transportation? How do you remember interacting with adults? How do they treat you? These are some questions to keep in mind when looking to work with young people. So thank you so much for participating in that visualization exercise as we kick off this webinar. Now going back to Steph.
Thanks, JJ. I think this visualization is a really great way for us to understand the complexities of all the individuals that we're working with. And for our participants on the webinar today who are adults, really taking a step back to think about what our priorities may have been when we were youth and comparing that to what our present day priorities are, because there are some really significant differences. So again, taking a step back and reframing our thinking as we go through the content today can help us to really make the most out of this webinar. So we'll move into youth engagement defined. And as I was looking for a definition to share for the webinar today, I found a lot of different ones. The reason I picked this one is because it emphasizes that there isn't one common definition for youth engagement. This one's from the Hartwood Center for Community and Youth Development, and it says, youth engagement is the meaningful and sustained participation of young people in activities that matter to them. There's not one common definition for youth engagement, as the process can look different for different people and needs. However, it commonly includes involvement in decision-making processes, promotion of leadership, supportive adult allies, and listening to and respecting the ideas of youth. It's important for us to recognize that this term can mean different things to different people. And so when people are talking about youth engagement, they can be talking about different things a lot of the time. So one first step for us when we're starting to talk about this work or when we're doing this work is to make sure that everyone's on the same page so that we know that we're all working towards the same goal. Another thing I want to stress in this definition is that last piece around listening to and respecting the ideas of youth. I know in youth work, there's a lot of opportunities to listen to youth. We have, our discussion circles, we have feedback surveys, we get satisfaction feedback from youth. But there's not always space for us to actually do something with that feedback. And so I would even add to this definition, listening to, respecting, and also doing something with the ideas of youth so that we're actually making use of it. Because there's a question of, what's the value of collecting information over and over again if we're not actually doing anything with it? So I just kind of want to pose that question for people to think about. So we've taken a look at, what youth engagement means, recognizing that it is a broad term. We're going to spend some time looking at the benefits of youth engagement. This resource that I'm pulling today is specific to mental health services. It's from the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health, but a lot of the pieces can apply to youth work across the board. So I just want to mention that for people. If we take a look here at this resource in particular, we see that it's specific to young people. We'll also take a look at benefits to adults, benefits to agencies, and benefits to community. So there's a really great breakdown of the 4 different levels. And being able to speak to the benefit of youth engagement is a really powerful tool for pushing our work forward. So when we're having conversations with management, when we have a new proposal or initiative that we really want to push forward, being able to communicate the benefits is something that can really support us in moving that work along. So the first piece here is, benefits for young people, increasing self-esteem, building new relationships, reducing depressive symptoms, decreasing risk of suicide. These are things that a lot of our youth programs are trying to achieve anyways. These are the goals that we're working towards anyways. So if we recognize that youth engagement is a strategy that supports the work we're already trying to do, it really only makes sense for us to consider how best to integrate it into our work. Increasing coping mechanisms and well-being, reducing substance use and smoking, strengthening resiliency is a big theme that we're seeing in the youth programs that we're supporting here at YouthREX. Increasing ownership for one's own care is another one I'll highlight. We're seeing a lot of youth programs that are combining clinical care components with peer support and community support as well. So those types of program, there's also still a really great fit with integrating youth engagement into that approach. Increasing critical thinking, promoting personal growth and identity development. Increasing critical thinking, again, thinking about the increase in different channels of information. We're accessing information in new ways, and it's really important that we're able to take a step back and assess, is this fact? And how does this information actually influence my sense of self, my well-being, my perception of other people from different groups? And what does that mean to me? So being able to critically assess the information that we're being bombarded with, oftentimes, this is a really great benefit as well for all people, not just for young people. Improving academic performance and reducing dropout rates. Again, a lot of youth programs are trying to achieve these outcomes anyway. Broadening and strengthening social networks, enhancing leadership skills. Moving on to benefits for adults around youth engagement is boosting energy. And this is one that I can personally attest to. I know that in my work, working with young people is always the most rejuvenating and energizing part of my work. So definitely something I can personally attest to. Increasing adult sense of belonging, increasing connectedness for adults. And again, thinking about the nature of youth work and the fact that it can be very, very difficult sometimes, and looking at these benefits to help us to continue to do this work and to take a step back and make sure that we're thinking about self-care. These pieces, again, contribute to that as well. Promotes new strategies for interacting with youth, bringing new perspectives to decision making, which is exactly what youth engagement is all about. Strengthening client service provider relationship, building confidence in working with youth, and deconstructing stereotypes about young people. Looking at benefits of youth engagement for the agency. And again, being able to speak to agency level benefits is something that can really support us in pushing our work forward. Oftentimes we can find linkages between our organization or our program's mission, vision, and values with these benefits right here to build a strong case for the work that we're doing or that we're trying to do. So improving the effectiveness of the program and agency's ability to connect with youth, increasing visibility of services in the community, promoting a culture of inclusion and diversity. And again, this one's really key. If we think about when we're doing programs for other situations, say for example, if we're in the process of planning a French language program, we wouldn't do that if we didn't have any French language skills, if we didn't have any French speaking people at the table. So it only makes sense when we're doing youth programs that we're bringing youth to the table and reflecting their perspectives and voice in the process as well. Enhancing access to services, increasing community reach, promoting entrepreneurship and innovation, fostering staff commitment to the agency, and of course, increasing credibility and appeal to relevant funders. Funding is a huge thing, and being able, again, to speak to these benefits can help secure some of those opportunities to push our work forward. The final level that this resource covered that I felt was really great to share was the benefits to the community. And so it encourages intergenerational collaboration and communication, bolsters community development, increases the agency's responsiveness to the community needs. And that's when we see a lot across the board in terms of the organizational mission, vision, and values, that there's usually a piece around, being responsive to the community. So again, something that youth engagement supports. Encourages youth to be civic-minded, and empowers youth to create opportunities to have youth voice, which is another great benefit. So we took a look at the definition, we took a look at the benefits. We're going to now move into the different levels of youth participation. Many of you have probably seen this ladder of participation many times throughout your work. This is something I want to share again, just to give an idea of the range. So we're looking at the bottom here. Rung number 1 is manipulation, where adults are using young people to support their own projects and pretend they are the result of young people's inspiration. And we work our way up incrementally to a place where we're at youth-adult partnerships. The reason I wanted to show this today is to show that even when we're near the bottom of the ladder, we're looking at, manipulation, decoration, participation for show. These things are still technically participation of youth or youth engagement. And so when we go back to thinking about the definition and how it can mean different things to different people, it's important for us to be able to recognize when we're working at these lower 3 rungs so that we can identify and then push them further up the ladder. We're going to talk about some ways to do that in a little while, but again, being able to identify when things are on those lower levels so we can push things forward and really work towards that youth adult partnership. We do, of course, recognize that reality happens, things change. It may not be the case that working at level 8 all the time makes sense or works with the group that you're working for or makes sense with the initiative you're working on. But again, being able to identify where you're at and thinking about ways to push work forward, this is a great tool and visual to be able to support some of that identification and strategizing. So thinking about that higher rung that we looked at, number 8, around youth adult partnership, I wanted to just share that definition to give an example of what that meaningful participation might look like. So youth adult partnership is involving youth and adults in responsible, challenging, and collective action that seeks to benefit an organization or larger community. And I want to highlight the word challenging there because this work is not easy and it does take time, and it's meant to be so. It's not meant to be easy. And so we're here for a reason. We recognize that this is something that's worth doing. We're here on this webinar for a reason, right? All individuals in the partnership have the opportunity to engage in planning, decision-making, and action consistent with their own interests and skill. Again, it's not expected that all youth and all adults will be involved in all decision making. Some members don't have sufficient time to always participate. Other members may not always be adequately prepared to participate. So recognizing that there needs to be space for flexibility, fluidity, and responsiveness. So in thinking about some of those lower rungs that we saw on the ladder, we start to think about, adultist behavior or things that we might want to kind of check ourselves when we're doing them. So I pulled some questions that I found from the National Youth Rights Association to kind of identify your behavior and be able to reflect on what it is that we're doing that might not be contributing to that authentic partnership with youth. Some great reflective questions. Would I treat an adult this way? Would I talk to an adult in this tone of voice? Would I make this decision for an adult? Would I have this expectation of an adult? Would I limit an adult's behavior in this way? Would I listen to an adult friend's problem in this way? And sometimes the answer might be no for good reason, depending on the circumstance. But if you find that you're reflecting on these things and your no feels a little bit hollow or shaky, then there's a little bit more reflection to happen there to really dig a bit deeper and figure out why it is that that response was that way. And this might be a really great slide to print off, have up at your desk and use as a reflection tool as you're doing your daily work or wherever it is that your workspace is. Having this up and being able to reflect on it throughout the day can be really helpful. So again, thinking about adultist behavior, some of the impacts or negative impacts that this has on young people is an undermining of self-confidence and self-esteem, which again is opposite to what a lot of our youth programs are trying to do. Increasing sense of worthlessness, increasing feeling of powerlessness, consistent experience of not being taken seriously, pieces like that, again, that really work against what it is that we're trying to achieve through our youth programs. So being conscious of that, being able to check in with ourselves and have some honest reflection can help us move forward with more meaningful partnerships with youth. So thinking about some concrete examples of how we can push towards more authentic participation. This is a table that was pulled from the Center for Study of Social Policy, and it takes a look at the different processes of working together, what typical youth participation might look like, and then an example of authentic youth engagement. So I'll just read out the second one there, adult-youth partnership, since we've talked a bit about that. Typical youth participation, communication is often one-sided, with adults doing much of the talking and planning. Trust and mutual understanding are lacking and not built. Age-based stereotypes are common, and participants may blame or sabotage each other. If we look over at an example of authentic youth participation or engagement, relationships are nourished and trust is built from the beginning. Youth and adults listen to each other with respect, encourage, challenge, and learn from each other. Everyone takes responsibility for his or her own actions and shares credit for achievements. Again, this might be a nice quick slide to have up by your desk or in your workspace to kind of reflect on, okay, where do I fall in terms of my level of youth participation, and how can I take a look at an example of how to push that forward? Similar table here as well, this time looking instead at organizational characteristics. I won't go too in depth with this one, but again, great to take a look at, you know, where am I at in terms of my level of participation? Is it more towards the typical youth participation, or is it more towards authentic youth engagement? Identifying those areas that need work, and then thinking about how to push them forward. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, JJ. We're going to have some reflective questions. We're going to open up a poll to all of our attendees today to get a sense of where you're at and how you're feeling in terms of your youth engagement process.
Awesome. So the first question is, how comfortable do you feel working with youth? So if you just send in your answers, the options start from not comfortable at all to very uncomfortable to fairly uncomfortable to fairly comfortable and very comfortable. And once everyone has sent in their answers, Steph will just do a quick summary of the poll. Yeah.
And once the responses come in, we're actually going to also invite our panel, Lena and Adam, to share their perspectives around this question as well, and perhaps how their level of comfort has changed as their journey with working with youth has evolved over time. So Katie, I'll pass it to you if you want to share the results for this first question. Okay, so we're seeing that almost half of people feel very comfortable, almost half again feeling fairly comfortable. That's great. So almost all participants are somewhat comfortable or quite comfortable working with youth. And we see a smaller percentage that are feeling fairly uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And it's good to get a sense of where you're at and be honest with yourself about your level of comfort and recognize that that can change in different situations with different groups of youth that you're working with, and that's perfectly okay. Okay, so we'll open it up to Lena and Adam and JJ as well if you wanted to share some reflections on this question.
Hi, everyone. For me, comfortable working with youth. I've been a youth leader since I was 16 and kind of organically began to work my way into leadership and youth programming. So I was there's no extremely comfortable on the list, but I started out with extremely comfortable because I was one and the same with youth. And as I've gotten older, it's kind of waned a little bit. I'm still fairly comfortable working with youth, but there's a little bit of me that kind of feels not cool enough, not with it enough to be engaging. But I've learned through experience that if you show interest and care in what they're interested in, most of the youth are very interested in caring towards what you're interested in. So that's my answer for that one.
Yeah. Similarly, I agree. I think I'm very comfortable working with youth, partly because it's kind of all I know, but also as I also kind of outgrow the youth category and kind of think of, how do I keep engaging those who are even younger than me? I think that there are obviously a lot of barriers, but in general, in terms of comfort, I think that that's something that we always have to, I guess, check ourselves kind of with those other questions that were being asked earlier. Yeah, very comfortable.
And for myself, comfortable working with youth. So I'm still a young person. I'm 19 years old. And so working with youth is like working with people who are very similar to myself as well. And going off of what Adam said, in terms of like how comfortable like young people are working with adults, it's when, adult allies care about us and take time to really get to know us and what our beliefs are, then we reciprocate the same thing back. So the comfort, it goes two ways. It's a two-way street.
I think for me too, I'll just share, like I grew up in the Greater Toronto area my whole life, and I found that my level of comfort working with youth changed when I moved to Northern Ontario because it was completely different. The culture was really different. And so it took me time to kind of rebuild my level of comfort, better understand the culture and context there. And so it did take time, definitely. So kind of keeping in mind like where we are and again, the youth that we're working with, it can kind of impact the way that we work with youth and how we view ourselves, and it can really change the process that way too. Okay, so I'll move the slide forward to our second poll question. Just a second.
Okay, so the second poll question is, how comfortable do you feel letting go of some of the control to allow youth to take some of the power? So we start from not comfortable at all to very uncomfortable to fairly uncomfortable to very comfortable and very comfortable. So just take a few seconds to submit your responses.
Okay, and if Katie, if you want to go ahead and share the results for that one. Okay, so we can see the majority of people are falling under the fairly comfortable, fairly uncomfortable area. We have a few who are very comfortable, but this is interesting to see that the majority of people were fairly and very comfortable working with youth, but when it comes to letting go of some of the power, the distribution shifts down a little bit. So something to note for sure. So I'll pass that back to the panel if they have any reflections on that question.
I think that it's really interesting, partly because, you know, I think when youth have some power, at least from my reflections actually in working with adults, sometimes it's easier for us to take some risk in making decisions. And so sometimes they actually want us to take those responsibilities and just kind of go with the flow. But I was also surprised to see the fairly uncomfortable part, because that's kind of been my experience, is, you know, almost when, you know, something maybe not be the best thing that an adult would want to do, you know, they will allow youth to do it because it's a lot easier for them to take those kinds of responsibilities. So I think that I don't know, I'm curious to hear why people feel a little bit uncomfortable.
For me, it's really comes to having a collaborative environment with youth who have less experience than adults, and being okay with the idea of allowing youth to gain that experience and to bring their own perspective into the programming. There has to be a place to practice, and our culture's kind of lost that apprenticeship model where you'd work into a trade or a field and figure out by working with an expert how to do things, but they wouldn't just show you and continue to show you. You obviously have to get your hands dirty at some point and do the work in the program. So there has to be in a program along the process somewhere where the youth then have a say. Maybe not 100% right away, but there has to be a plan for them to know that this is their program, and they are an integral part of planning it and making sure that they do have opportunities to actually start to steer what's going on.
Allowing youth to take some of that power and responsibility in your program is both exciting and nervous, but that's just like when you collaborate with any other organizations or adults, right? When adults collaborate with other adults, there's still that anxiety around letting go of some of that control and allowing other persons to influence the direction. So why is it when we work with youth, there's a whole other freak out, right? So maybe it comes from that, maybe they have lack of experience, but we have to maybe rethink the way what we mean by experience, because they also have experiences and very rich experiences to bring to the table. So we really need to start questioning, why do we feel uncomfortable when it comes to youth to letting go of some of that control, when in other collaborations we're also doing that as well.
Yeah, JJ, I really like your point about any time we're working with other people and having to share power, and especially in team settings, there's always that kind of anxiety around letting someone else take on a piece of your work, or if it's your vision, letting someone else like be a part of that. So I think you raise a really good point around it's not just specific to youth, and why is it that when we are working with youth, there's kind of that extra layer of hesitation or anxiety. And so we'll move into our third and final poll question for the attendees.
So the third question is, what are your top concerns about working with youth as partners? So we have 5 different options over there, and you can select which ones you are the most concerned about. So one is giving up some of the control, having different priorities than youth, not being able to relate to youth, the work might take longer to get done, or adults are expected to have all the answers. So take a few seconds to select which ones you are concerned about.
Okay, and Katie will take a look at the results for this question. Okay, interesting. So having different priorities than youth came up a lot for people. Second most commonly selected was the work might take longer to get done. And yeah, that's not untrue. Like I mentioned in the definition of youth adult partnerships, it mentions that this work is challenging. So it is important for us to acknowledge that and recognize we do need to build in more time to work meaningfully with young people. Least concern, adults are expected to have all the answers. That's kind of nice to know, because I know sometimes in my own work it can feel, you know, like you're supposed to have all the answers. But again, as JJ was saying, we can feel like that with anyone that we're working with, anytime we're in a collaborative environment. And then sort of low uptake for giving up some of the control, and about 1/3 of people chose not being able to relate to youth. So I'll pass this back to the panel as well.
I can speak to the having different priorities. I think that maybe on the surface, the youth and adults might look like they have different priorities, but I think if you did some digging down, that a lot of the priorities would end up being just different methods of getting to the same things, and that including the youth in those conversations early on is going to be an integral move to helping the adults learn how the youth want to proceed and gain that kind of identifying priorities. They might not have the clear words at the beginning, but they certainly have aspirations and passions that are developing.
Yeah. In terms of the having the work take longer, I think that's interesting because, you know, of course, the first time that, you know, you're going to delegate something, there's going to be that investment in kind of showing the person how it's done, and that will take longer the first time. But then after that, it's actually the work happens a lot faster, and probably a lot faster than if you were to do it on your own. Mostly because, I mean, I know it's kind of been said before, and I don't want to stereotype this, but youth are a lot more energetic and have some time that sometimes a lot of adult volunteers or adults trying to engage youth in volunteering don't have the same amount of time that youth do. And so I think that it actually happens a lot faster when you're thinking about productivity.
And going off of what Lena said, you know, you hear the quote, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's a really great reflection of the worry around might make the work take longer. The investment is so worth it. The product is going to be so much more better. And in terms of having those different priorities, what Adam was saying about like digging beneath the surface, right? Like maybe in your organization, you're like, oh, I need to meet all these funding requirements. This needs to look good in a report. But at the end of the day, why are you doing the work that we're doing? You're doing it for the young people, right? And so at the end of the day, both of you are caring about the same demographic, the sort of the same results, right? So I think it's really digging into that and having that shared collective vision, and talking about that when you're initially starting a youth adult partnership is super important to ground your work.
Thanks a lot, JJ. So thank you for our panelists for joining us. We'll see you in just a little while when we open back up our panel discussion. So I will pass it back to me. If you guys want to turn off your webcams, that's okay, because we have a little bit more content to go through. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, just thinking about how powerful reflection is, we intentionally built in these poll questions and that visualization exercise at the beginning because it is really something that should be taking place throughout the work that we're doing, reflecting on, you know, where we're at, what our thoughts are about the work that we're doing, any biases that we might hold, so that we can continue to grow and evolve and really improve in the work that we're doing with young people. So we will now move into looking at youth engagement in practice, specific to engaging youth in the program planning process. What I've prepared today is a kind of step-by-step process that uses YouthREX's approach to program planning as a guide to kind of frame how you might work through program planning and how you might pull youth in meaningful ways throughout the process. So I'll start by sharing our framework for evaluating youth well-being. This is a 7-step process that moves from, your pre-evaluation checkup to understanding your program through using a logic model to map out your program components, planning and focusing your evaluation, collecting evidence, analyzing, interpreting, and animating evidence, learning from evidence with internal communication, and then learning from evidence with external communication. I'll mention that this entire framework is something that we offer to youth programs absolutely free through our youth program supports program. This is called customized evaluation supports if people are interested in walking through the entire 7-step process. And then for programs that are interested in perhaps just focusing in on one or 2 different areas within the framework, we also offer those specialized kind of focused in supports as well through our youth program supports. Again, all completely free for youth programs in Ontario. So for the sake of today's conversation, we're going to zoom into step number 2, understanding your program using a program logic model. As Katie mentioned earlier on, we do have part 2 of this webinar series, which will look at evaluation more broadly. So anyone who's interested in evaluation, be sure to sign up for that. So what is a logic model? It's a picture of how your program works, the theory and assumptions underlying the program. The model provides a roadmap of your program, highlighting how it's expected to work, what activities need to come before others, and how desired outcomes are achieved. Logic models are the foundational program planning tool that we use at YouthREX. That's why I've chosen for this to be kind of the way that we walk through our webinar today. But keeping in mind that logic models also have a really strong link to evaluation, and they can kind of be that foundation to develop your evaluation plan as well. So some functions that logic models have, they summarize the key elements of your program, explain the rationale behind program activities, describe the link between activities and outcomes, provide an opportunity for stakeholders to discuss the program and agree on its components and intended results, serves as a useful communication tool to describe your program to others, and finally, it's meant to occur in the planning stages of your evaluation. So at the top here, we have the YouthREX logic model template. And then at the bottom, I've added another smaller visual that adds that first step of a situational assessment, which will typically come before your logic model development phase. So if we take a quick look at the components here, we see on the far left is our program inputs. So these are the things that make our program possible: our resources, our staff, our volunteers, funding that we might have. These are our program inputs. Our activities under our outputs are the things that we're doing during our program sessions with people. So that might be, group discussions. It might be sports and recreation activities. This isn't just talking about fun activities like field trips, but it's all of the things that are happening within your program sessions. Participation is looking at who your program is intended for. So who's your target population? What are their demographics? How do they identify themselves? And then outcomes, moving towards the right, are the things that your program is trying to achieve. So oftentimes youth programs are looking at things like increasing self-confidence, increasing social connectedness, all of these goals that we're trying to work towards through the work that we're doing. This is where our outcomes would come in. At the bottom, we have our yellow rectangle, which is assumptions or external factors. So recognizing that our youth programs do not exist in vacuums. There's tons of things happening in our environment, in the environments of young people and in the lives of young people. So how do those impact the work that we're doing? Those are the external factors, and assumptions are things that we're assuming to be true in order for this sequence of the logic model to hold. So, we're assuming that certain activities lead to certain outcomes. Here's the reasons why, oftentimes pulling evidence into those conversations. As we walk through the program planning process using the logic model as a guide, I want to highlight this resource here, 10 ways to meaningfully engage underrepresented youth. What I did when I was preparing is I pulled different pieces of this fact sheet and kind of teased it out based on the different phases of logic model development, because this is really great, good practice that's already been developed. This resource is available for free on our YouthREX exchange, exchange.youthrex.com. And it's also shared here as a handout. So again, a really quick tip sheet that has practicable ways for us to start thinking about how to better engage youth in our processes. So we'll take a look first at a situational assessment or a needs assessment, which I mentioned would typically be the first step in planning for a new program. So this is really one of the first places that we should be engaging youth. If it's one of the first things we're doing as part of program planning, youth should be a part of that process. And so your situational assessment is really where you're pulling in knowledge and evidence to inform what the need is for your program, what your program needs to look like, what you're being responsive to. And you're pulling in evidence and knowledge. And here at YouthREX, we define knowledge as coming from 3 different places. 1, lived experience. 2, practice, and 3, research. And so looking at that visual of our definition of knowledge, we can see that there is definitely a fit to pull the voices of young people in throughout, especially looking at lived experience. Again, if we're creating a program for and with young people, of course, their voices and experiences should be reflected throughout the planning process. Research as well is somewhere that we can pull young people in, but making sure that we're equipping them to be able to do that work and setting them up for success. And so the 3 pieces from the fact sheet that I've pulled here around good practices for engaging youth are first, recognizing your power and their power. So again, the situational assessment would be one of those first steps in program planning. So being kind of transparent and reflective in those power dynamics from the very beginning is a great way to sort of set the tone and really set the stage for that relationship moving forward. The second one there that I've chosen is create a sandbox from the get-go. So really sharing the parameters of the project, being transparent about some of the things that are possible, some of the barriers that might come into place in the work, and sharing that with youth early on so that youth can exercise creative freedom while understanding the boundaries and expectations of the work that you're doing. So again, this is really helpful to do right from the beginning so that everyone's on the same page. And the third piece that I pulled for good practices for this part of program planning is making all resources known. And this tip here really speaks to resources around access. So looking at things like transit, ability to rearrange office space, making the space accessible for young people to be engaged, but also thinking about resources to support young people in doing the work. So when we're thinking about pulling young people or youth into research, are we giving them adequate training? Are we providing them the resources and tools that they need to be able to do the research? You know, we talked about how our expectations differ when we're working with adults versus when we're working with youth. We wouldn't just throw an adult onto a project, expect them to learn it on their own and go. We wouldn't do the same with youth. So again, making sure that all resources that are available are known and they know how to access them to support the work. The second piece that we'll look at is our outcomes. So typically when we're developing a logic model for a new program, you'd start by thinking about what it is that you're trying to do before getting into the details of how you're going to do it. So you'll start with your goals or your outcomes. This is another place where youth involvement and youth having a say in what those program outcomes are is really important, because this really shapes the entire feel and look of the program. You know, we recognize that a lot of the time there are parameters set by our funders around some of the key things that our program needs to be hitting, but there is still flexibility and ways to achieve those outcomes that reflects youth voice and values the perspective that youth bring to the table. We'll talk about some concrete examples of how to kind of mesh those 2 worlds in our panel discussion, but just something to keep in mind when we're thinking about the outcomes that we want to achieve in our youth programs. So the 2 pieces that I pulled here are, first, get to know their interests and goals. This helps to ensure that youth roles and responsibilities align with what they want to do. There's been a lot of youth programs asking, you know, how come youth aren't coming to our program? How come they're not interested? How come they come once and stop coming to sessions? if there's a disconnect between what youth want to do and what you're offering, that's a clear, great starting point to start thinking about how to rejig some of your program pieces. So here in building the program, having youth share their interests and goals and actually integrating that into your program logic model is a great way to be responsive to the pieces that they're sharing with you. The other piece that I highlighted here is that silence is a part of the conversation. At YouthREX, we do logic model development sessions, and so we bring program staff together with youth in sessions that are sometimes 2-3 hours long, where people have time to think through different program components, think through their perspective, their needs, and we create space for people to share their perspectives. So this one's saying, give time for youth to respond or ask questions, especially about sector jargon that may need explanation. Even, the word logic model, that's not something that a lot of people are using in their everyday life. Even within our sector, that's not something that a lot of people are naturally using as part of their planning processes. So making sure that we're taking a step back to make sure that everyone's on the same page and understands what it is that we're trying to do together. Explicitly inviting youth to contribute helps them to feel like their ideas matter and that you're curious to hear from them. And there are different ways to do this, right? People might be comfortable sharing feedback in writing, one-on-one, or with the entire group. There's also ways that you can use technology to get people to share in ways that are more comfortable for them. So just keeping that in mind, that creating space and leaving silence is part of the process. So on the left-hand side of the slide, I just shared a breakdown of what some outcomes are that might be framed. So looking at short-term outcomes, typically we're looking at changes in awareness, attitude, skill. Medium-term outcomes are things around behavior change, decision-making, social action. And then longer-term are conditions, social well-being, health, economic, and environmental. And so thinking back to our logic model template, this is the sequence of the outcomes that we'd expect to see coming from our youth program. So after we take time to identify what the goals of our program are and make sure that we're reflecting the perspective of youth interests, we then look at how we're going to achieve those goals. So what are going to be our program activities? Again, this is a place to really make sure that we're getting to know the interests and goals of young people and reflecting that in the work that we're doing. And this is a nice place to kind of bridge youth perspectives and interests with other sources of research if there's a requirement for like an evidence-informed approach in the work that we're doing, which is oftentimes really helpful to make us have greater chances of success of reaching the outcomes that we want to. Really bridging what youth are interested in with other sources of evidence to make sure that we're taking the best possible approach to reach our outcomes of interest. Again, I chose making all resources known to youth. And the piece that I added here around participation is letting youth self-identify. Using terminology that youth use for themselves. So when we're writing about, who our target population is, what their demographics are, we're using words that youth have selected for themselves. So here, looking at the explanation, labels such as at risk, marginalized, or even youth are strong words to use that have repercussions around how you treat youth, how they see themselves. While there may be contexts where these labels are appropriate and necessary, it's important to take time to consider how your organization embodies these labels internally and externally. And then thinking back to our program logic model, using the language that young people use is another way to really make sure that we're reflecting their perspectives in our work. Okay, and then looking at program inputs. So again, the resources, staffing, all of those pieces that you're putting into your program to make it possible. Ways to engage youth here. One thing that I pulled was to provide a job title for young people. So thinking past youth just coming to our programs as participants, what other roles can they hold to support the facilitation and implementation of the program? And how do we acknowledge that and honor that in a way that is concrete and solidified? One way to do that is to provide a job title to the youth who are supporting this program in more leadership roles or other ways. So a job title helps to clarify responsibilities, validate youth roles, and it's something that can be added to their resume as well. Okay, and the final piece that was highlighted here was around the assumptions and external factors. Just like every other section that we highlighted so far, this is a really, really valuable place to have youth share their perspectives and their impacts. Sometimes youth workers are not from the same community that the youth are that we're serving. Sometimes we might not be as in tune with the context or other things that are happening locally. And so this is another great place where we can start to fill some of those gaps in our knowledge and make sure that we're being fully reflective of the reality of young people's lives. Assumptions refer to the beliefs we have about the program, the youth involved, the situation, and the way we think the program will work. For example, program may engage youth in activities meant to foster a sense of environmental stewardship. Some assumptions might be youth are the best target for this type of programming. A lack of stewardship is the root of the problem that should be addressed versus other factors. And engaging in program activities will foster a sense of environmental stewardship. Faulty assumptions are often the reason for program failures. So really taking time to critically assess, pick things apart, and make sure that things are actually making sense and not just coming from us as individuals can help to strengthen our work and set us up for success. And then external factors refer to elements that affect the program over which there is little control. So aspects external to the program that influence the way the program operates include larger social, political, and economic factors, such as funding and policy shifts. Important things to remember. Logic models in terms of program planning are used best in conjunction with other descriptive information or as a part of a conversation. And again, this is a place where we can pull youth in to really make sure that their perspectives are reflected and shaping the work that we do. They're used for program planning. It's advisable to start with outcomes and then determine what activities will be appropriate and what inputs are needed. Multiple stakeholders should review the logic model and agree upon what is included and how. And again, youth as stakeholders is another place where we can pull them in. I also just wanted to share some limitations of logic models, recognizing that they're not the end-all be-all. There are other ways that people do program planning. Logic models only represent reality. They are not reality. And so again, it's really important to think about those external factors and the assumptions that we're using to create our logic model. They focus on expected outcomes, but you also need to pay attention to unintended or unexpected outcomes, both positive, negative, or neutral. Outcomes cannot always be attributed to the items listed on the logic model. And finally, logic models don't address the following questions. Are we doing the right thing? Should we have this program at all? And that's where taking that step back and doing that situational assessment is really, really key. All of these limitations are areas that youth knowledge can help us to work through to strengthen our program planning and really build a program that's responsive and valuable. So 3 final tips before we move into our panel discussion. For fostering youth engagement, acknowledge the inexperience and concerns of many adults. I think our poll questions gave us an opportunity to take a peek at some of that. Adapt to the complexities of youth's lives, and respond to existing structures and norms in organizations. So I will now open it up to our panel, and we'll start to move into our panel discussion. Okay, perfect. So if everyone could just start by sharing an overview of your youth program.
Sounds good. So Christie Lake Kids, as an organization, we're 96 years old, and we started as a youth diversion program. We offered an alternative wilderness camp experience instead of kids going to juvenile detention. And Throughout the years, we've carried on that tradition and more morphed into a preventative organization working on skill development and working from kids age 6 all the way up to 17. Our main youth program is called Leaders in Training, and it's a leadership program based on a grade 9, 10, 11 program, 3 years, meeting 3 hours a night for about 30 weeks during the year, including a number of weekend experiences, as well as a program at our camp in the summer. We're also piloting a grade 7-8 program to feed into the Leaders in Training program and a grade 12 ambassador program. All in all, it's developed to work with kids that are in economically disadvantaged situations, so youth who are unable to afford other opportunities to engage their leadership skills, and it does provide an inclusive and intentional place where youth can develop their own personal goals, but also work within a community.
Thanks, Adam.
So one of the youth programs that I was involved in is called Together We Flourish. So it was almost a organic kind of collective where a lot of youth we got together and we wanted to do some projects. So it was very much project based. So we did, the one thing that was ongoing throughout the year was a community garden that we started. And that was also kind of the initial project that really inspired others to kind of create other projects. So we did a lot of different arts-based programming, but again, they're like short-term, couple months at a time. So it wasn't anything that was systemic in a way. But yeah, it was really about activating space and creating opportunities for social inclusion and expression. We did a lot of programs with newcomer youth and really getting them engaged and volunteering in the community in those ways.
So the organization that I started in 2016, LIGHT, which stands for Lead, Inspire, Grow, Hope, Transform, is a youth-led grassroots organization in York Region, and we equip young people with the 21st century employable skills and knowledge that they need to be able to facilitate social change projects in their own communities. So we have like 6 different programs that tackle a different social issue, and there's over 55 positions in the team, and young people, all of them in high school except for myself, I just finishing up my first year at university, hold all those 55 positions in the team. And adult allies are part of an advisory committee where they support us when we ask for support in ways we need the support, which we make clear, right? And so how the breakdown of the position looks like is there's an executive team, and then for each youth program, there's a director or co-directors, and there's around 4 youth program facilitators for each of the 6 programs. And the executive team basically is the one that helps equip the young people to be able to carry out the projects in each of their programs. So from like finance to marketing to valuation to program planning and delivery to training to human resources, young people are fulfilling all those positions.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So thinking about your current work or past youth organizations you were involved with, what does youth engagement look like, sound like, feel like in program planning?
So I've had a lot of various different things, so I'll kind of string along the things that were consistent in all of them. And I think one of the main things that I've always, if I had like a bucket that carried all the things that worked in every situation I've been in, the main things are that there has to be a communal care for each other. It has to be a community-based initiative. It's about the relationships that are happening. You're also getting skills and you're also doing all kinds of really valuable things, but if the people that are coming together meeting aren't connecting, you're going to have trouble having success. And so youth engagement looks like a healthy community of people caring about each other and sharing and reaching that next level of being in a community together.
Yeah, building off of that, I think part of building a community is really about, those relationships, right? And for me, I think youth engagement is, I guess, the buzzword authentic. Recently somebody, ask me a question like, what do you think about this, XYZ, like a consultative question. And my immediate response was, okay, well, what do you think? So that, let them share their opinions so that they'll actually listen to me when it's my turn to talk. And they stopped and they were like, I actually don't know. I came to you for, I'm asking you honestly. So I think that that's something that, makes us question, what our authentic engagement and relationships are with youth. And I think that those one-on-one relationships is really what ends up building that broader community.
And going to the question about like, what does it look like, sound like, feel like in program planning? I know it looks like to me when I'm thinking about what is youth engagement, can I just tell, like if I'm looking at young people, how do I know if they're engaged? Then if our young people are gathered around a table, with their laptops out, like notebooks out, and they're all like scribbling down ideas, they're calling adult allies, emailing them for support. I know that they are being engaged in this program planning process, and it sounds like them being excited, sharing the work that they did, bringing work to the table, their plan, like bringing out project plans, talking about funding requirements, because again, I feel like the more transparent you are in your process, the more that they feel like this is their program and their project as well, and the more that they're able to innovate, feel like they're able to be innovative and contribute to the program, right? And then it feels like youth who feel like they're at home, like they matter, like their work matters, right? Because it's not only you're asking them, oh, like what's your opinion, and then you never follow up on that, right? That feedback loop is like super important. So and then because of the skills that they're gaining, not only do they feel like their future has hope, not in terms of their career, but they feel like the state of the world, there's hope. And it's, again, going back to what Adam said, it's all about that community building. So that's what they feel.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So given those pieces that you shared, what are some concrete things that can help to create that look, that sound, that feel of youth engagement that you just shared about?
So there has to be communication, obviously. You have to ask people to be involved. You can't just kind of leave it blank. And so setting up the group for success and communicating to youth. One of the things that our engagement with YouthREX has really highlighted is helping youth find the value of the program and making that really clear, because a lot of times there's these programs and some of the kids might not really get at first the value that their presence would be into the program for themselves, but also as a whole. So really working on that initial communication piece is a very concrete and essential tool that we need to spend a lot of time making sure that we're doing it well.
Yeah, I think it's something JJ mentioned, is that feedback loop. So it's not just, what do you guys want to see? What are you folks interested in? But then if you aren't able to actually act upon it, then at least share why and share that wisdom with it. Because, I think there's a learning curve for both adults and for youth when we're working together. Just as much as you guys are learning how to work with youth, I think that youth are also learning about how to work with adults, and really it's a beautiful thing when we can be frank and have open and honest conversations about, yeah, we heard you, but this isn't going to happen, and this is why, and really give us that space to learn from you.
Yeah, 100%. Like communication is like one of the biggest barriers to young people and adults working together. And so I think like working through that initially, talking about the expectations for each other, being transparent about the processes is like super important. Yeah, like a lot of people know how to talk, but communication is a skill that we all need to learn. And so I think that is something that you need to concretely do and create space for and time for to have that discussion open and frankly.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So switching gears a bit, what are some of the results that you've seen from engaging youth in program planning? Or how has engaging youth in program planning affected your program?
Well, I'll start with a famous story of how I failed to include youth in my program planning and how it bombed miserably. So I decided to plan a whole day for our youth and our youth group a number of years ago, and it was all about watermelons. And I decided that it would be really fun if we did all kinds of games with watermelons. And apparently that was a complete fail, and none of my youth wanted to do anything that I said. And I remember to this day, and watermelons are always a reminder that if you want to use watermelons in your youth program, probably just have them for snack, and then work with the youth on developing the rest of the time you spend together. Yeah, and there's a pretty bad picture of me somewhere wearing a watermelon helmet, and yeah, it really sums it all up for me. But some of the positive results definitely have seen is that you see youth become inspired with the things they care about. I know in some of my youth programs we've had people that have been musically talented, and then you can take that the talent and ability and work with them to help them do incredible things like hosting, a concert, or doing something where they never thought it may be possible. So I remember we had way back when a youth awards night where everybody in the youth program got an award, and we did it red carpet and everything, and the youth were so engaged and inspired by like the idea that it was basically we all worked together to put on an award show for all of us together. It was really, really motivating for them, and they put their heart and soul into it. So
Thanks, Adam.
I think one of the biggest things is if you don't engage youth, then not only will they potentially not be interested in the program, but you won't fully know their accessibility needs to actually get to it, even if they want to be there. Sometimes the smallest things are not, you just don't think about, does the person have a car? Are they able to get there? In Windsor, if we don't have the best transportation, how are people actually going to come to the program? What are the decisions that go through their mind when they want to decide whether they can participate in this activity or not? And who are the people who are going to influence that decision for them? And really thinking about, why they might not want to be there. Or if they do want to be there, why they can't be there.
For me, I've seen how once youth realize their impact through their initiatives and events that they're hosting, they become active role models for other youth to engage in action, also become part of our movement, right? So in this way, we're building a continuous cycle of confident young leaders of social change. And through training and mentorship, by developing and honing their skills, they're able to directly translate these soft and hard skills with confidence, because now they're planning and executing their own initiatives. They're from beginning to end, they're the ones who are recognizing, assessing, producing innovative solutions to the relevant needs and gaps in the community, right? And beyond the skills and the confidence and all the social benefits, they're not only have I seen these young people who take these experiences and are now able to get part-time jobs, and open up so many more other doors for them. It helps them think about possible careers, right, as they go on to explore at a young age what they want to be involved in. And it's great to see as the years that we've done light, as people have graduated and gone on to do their own things. We see them now have the confidence to challenge issues that continue to impact them, right? So it's not just they come in and they just do it for the time that they're there, but this is they've changed as people. And in terms of concrete results that I've seen, a huge example is one of the conferences that we just held, right? So because youth were the ones who completely planned the entire conference, it was a very relevant conference, and it was very hands-on. A lot of conferences we go to, and it's very inspiring, but it's also led by adults who are just doing all the speaking, right? So one of the sessions that the young people who planned created an escape room for a simulation on poverty. So this was an escape room that you couldn't actually escape, to start some discussion on systemic issues rather than individualizing the problem of poverty. So this is a lot of this is teenagers from the ages of 13 to 17 years old who were on this team, who created this entire simulation, and they created so many simulations like this for the conference. So this conference became so much more impactful, right? Because they created something that young people would love. They were like, young people love escape rooms, and we want to highlight the issue of poverty. How can we bring this together to really bring this issue alive, right? So this is like one concrete example of how young people have such innovative ideas, and we just need to allow them that space and create an environment where they're able to flourish.
It's really great. And I think, themes of equity and inclusion came up in all of the pieces that you were mentioning. JJ, you talked about, these systemic issues instead of individualizing the situations that people are in. I know, Lena, you also talked about, thinking about accessibility and some of the barriers that youth are facing to be able to even just come and show up to a program. And Adam, you talked about actively including people in the process. And so my next question is, how does equity and inclusion inform your approach in engaging youth in program planning?
So in the past probably year or so, our LIT program has becoming, we've basically created a macro change where over the past years, we're kind of tweaking it and doing this and that. And one thing that all of our youth, when we did an audit, I guess, of sorts, but we asked all the youth that are involved in our program what was the most important things, and those were the two words that came up more than anything, is that it has to be inclusive and it has to be a place where everybody has value and is shared the value. And so it's obviously a strength that we've had, that because these people, the youth that have been in the program, have spoken and advocated for themselves and become, they kind of created that without us having to even work on our program. They basically, in their attending, stood up and said, this is who we are and this is what we're going to, this is how we're going to have our program. So it's really just kind of championing them and stepping back and letting them kind of carry those values as the backbone of the program, I think.
When I think of, I guess, inclusion, I start thinking of, what is it that each person wants to feel successful and included in this, right? And I think that sometimes we don't always know the answers to that, but that's why we have to let a lot of youth kind of make those decisions, right? So for example, we were running a farmer's market on campus, and we had a lot of different roles and positions. And one of the things that I really learned or realized afterwards is, one of the international students, for example, wanted to do the mascot job. So she was wearing a carrot costume and going around and advertising about the farmer market throughout like different classrooms. And a couple of other people were saying, no, don't let her do it. Like, I want to do this. I'm like, that person or XYZ is going to be so much more, that person's more bubbly. They can do a better job of being a mascot. It's not easy to wear a mascot. Okay. So long story short, I think that afterwards she told me about how honored she felt to actually do it, because it really increased her public speaking abilities, because she was kind of, she was hidden, but it almost gave her an opportunity to talk in ways that she would have felt not comfortable to do so outside of the mascot. And so I think that a lot of times we have perceptions of what people are capable of doing, and that is a big barrier to inclusion, because people will not only develop their ability to, their capacity and their skills and opportunities when you give them those opportunities that you think they're not capable of, but it's also it's the definition of inclusion, right? Just allowing people to be included in the way they want to be, and just opening up those different opportunities for people to claim ownership over it.
And yeah, just briefly adding on to what Adam and both Lena said, because I think I completely agree with what both of you have stated. When I'm thinking about when we're doing our program planning processes, it's not only looking at who's at the table, but whose voices at the table are being truly heard, right? And it goes beyond just active listening, right? And then I'm going to tie it back again to that feedback loop, right? Whose opinions at the table are actually being integrated into program processes, right? And why are some people's opinions not being integrated. So it's questioning that and what we think is good ideas. Oh, we should include that one, but we shouldn't include this one. Why do we think what we think, right? So it's continuously questioning that, because understanding that everyone comes in with experiences that are valid, and so their opinions, whatever they're sharing on what they think is the best next step, comes from a place where we have to value where they're coming from, right? And I think and again, this is a process that takes time for us to be able to like critically think about it and have those open discussions on it. But I think it's so much more worth it. Like, equity is not easy, inclusion is not easy, but we need to invest time into it, and then we get much more better results.
Yeah, I was thinking too of an example that came to mind for me. Like in the past, a lot of my work with youth was around health promotion focus, and I was trained a lot by the Youth Advocacy Training Institute to look at the way that industry targets young people to kind of make harmful behaviors seem normal. So consumption of harmful products seem normal. So I'm thinking about work that we did around like commercial tobacco use, and thinking about how the industry has a long history of targeting like young Black youth, young LGBTQ plus youth, young Indigenous youth with really harmful and deceptive marketing practices. One thing that worked really well for me was taking this overall theme that we had to focus on, which was, smoking prevention, and being able to allow youth to link that to pieces of their identity that was important to them. So when working with Indigenous youth, we looked at, okay, how has this industry targeted my community? And what do I want to say back to them as part of my advocacy, as part of my approach to campaigning and raising awareness about this issue? Same thing for other groups of youth I was working with, just finding ways for people to create that connection between their personal identity and the way that the alcohol industry too has targeted different groups of people in really exploitative ways. So one thing that we did with that is we had a spoken word night where people created spoken word poetry that spoke to some of those issues directly and kind of reframed who they say they are in comparison to who the industry says they are, and how the industry is kind of like exploiting these different aspects of their identity. And so that was a really nice way to have people feel empowered to talk about something that, was kind of mandated through our program, which is health promotion, smoking, those types of things, but make that personal connection between who they are and find that connection between, okay, this is how this matters to me. This is how I can feel, passionate about this issue. So I think we talked a bit about, some barriers. So I just want to kind of bring that question back if people want to share one of the barriers or some barriers that have come up to engaging youth in program planning, and how did you overcome it?
Selena shared a really good overview of this a little bit earlier, but for Christy Lake, one of the things that we've existed on is helping to remove barriers. It's one of our kind of tenets of why we exist, is that we want barrier-free programming for kids and youth, and it is taking into consideration everything from transportation to healthy food to even just helping the youth overcome themselves to be an active and actively involved in the program if they have maybe self-worth issues or any kind of struggles that they've kind of picked up along the way. We want to help them to succeed within the context of the program. So there's definitely many barriers seen and unseen that we tackle, but helping the youth find that kind of self-advocacy, self-determination is a huge first step in helping them to develop leadership. And that's probably when you see that switch in a youth, you feel inspired and feel that that any of the other barriers could be overcome.
I think one of the barriers that is probably easily fixed but overlooked is really about, it was kind of mentioned earlier about one of the best practices is having a job title or something. But I think that one of the benefits of it that maybe wasn't identified is also just maybe it'll address the whole power dynamics that I was thinking of earlier, right? If youth don't know what would bother you, right? If they are going to step outside of their permitted box of area, then they need to know that, right? And I think that that's one of the barriers to youth participation is when they have like unclear or vague positions. Sometimes even if they are getting that mentorship to actually do the project, they won't know where they're fitting in the overall picture, and that confusion is not attractive. You know, if you're going to do a job, you have a list of objectives to meet, you have kind of guidelines on what your job is, and I think that sometimes those are missing from when we ask youth to volunteer, and it's really easy to fix it. So
one of the barriers that I thought of is and the way to overcome that is being flexible. I think young people are super busy, just as everyone else is, doing a bunch of different things. So saying you have to be here at this time, these are the only times you have to be in person, that prevents a lot of young people from being engaged. So what has worked is like creating subcommittees, having meeting minutes shared to all the young people and them to be a part of that, doing online calling people to catch them up on whatever they missed, if they have any questions. So also doing like Skype calls. That has been a way that more young people have been able to be engaged. And the reason why I also like subcommittees is because then people are able to organize within themselves a little bit smaller and then come back as a larger group and share those learnings. And that also works in terms of like flexibility and being flexible in the ways that young people want to be engaged, right? And having with the roles, like having different amounts of, I guess, investment of time available in these different positions, right? So I know in our organization, there's some positions that require maybe 10 hours a week, while some others are like 2 hours, some others are like 5 hours. So having those, how much ever young people want to be engaged, we have different roles depending on that.
And one activity or exercise that we actually had done before was where everybody actually created their own job title, you know, and created their own job descriptions, and then they shared it and passed it around, and then other people checked to kind of see if that was actually reflective of the work that they are doing. And I think it was a really meaningful exercise because it allowed other people to know how to you know, how to work together to meet a common goal. What are the different pieces of the puzzle? And sometimes that kind of information is present only with the leader of the group, and a lot of youth might not understand the full dynamics of, you know, who else is working on a project. So I think that's a very concrete, like, kind of tool that was very helpful for us.
Thanks, everyone. So I'm just realizing that we're already at 12:26. I didn't realize. So Katie, just your thoughts on if we should pose one more question to the panel, or if you feel we should open it up to attendees at this point.
I feel like you can go ahead, and if you have one more question for the panel, that would be great. If anyone does have a question that we don't have time to get to or that hasn't been covered through the conversation, we can certainly take that up one-on-one after the fact. Feel free to send us an email. But yeah, why don't we do one last question for the panel to sort of close off the conversation?
Sure, thanks. So I'll finish with how do you create a welcoming organizational culture for youth as partners? I'd wanted to kind of go through these different prompts separately, but I'll just share some kind of keywords to keep in mind. Communication, physical space, processes, feedback loop, which we talked about a bit, and also buy-in from leadership. And so the question again is, how do you create a welcoming organizational culture for youth as partners?
Awesome. So at Christie Lake Kids, one of the neat things with many of our youth, almost all the youth in our program, they grew up as a kid going to our camp or being in our STAR after school programs. So they already have an affinity with us. But the real key is now that they're youth and they are part of an organization called Christie Lake Kids, is that how do they find their place as youth within that organization? We create that welcoming organizational culture definitely through providing the leadership and training program and providing real value opportunities. And that's really the process we're going through now, is how much value can we offer these kids that are now youth and that are now figuring out what they want to be and do when they you know, then they go through this process and this stage of their lives. So I think the part we're trying is maintaining that affinity for Christie Lake, but also helping them see a broader horizon, and that So they're already been welcomed, but in a sense that they're being welcomed again as the next stage of their development. And so finding things like we provide at the camp, a lot of our youth get their first job experience working as junior counselors and being, working at the camp that they attended when they were kids. And so it's been a really good cycle that way, but we know that there's so many more opportunities for youth, and many youth don't necessarily want to work at camp with kids. Just because they did it when they were kids doesn't mean that they automatically want to go and replicate that. So we're looking to broaden horizons to really individually find any youth that's part of Christie Lake at that point. How can we help them line up their skills and passions with something in the community that can be of really value to them and help them achieve those goals.
Thanks, Adam.
I think one of the biggest turnoffs for youth who want to be engaged, with an organization is when they don't feel like their ideas are actually being implemented, right? I kind of referenced that earlier in terms of sharing, the reason or the logic behind not actually implementing their ideas, because a lot of youth are innovative and they don't just volunteer, oh, I saw this role, I'm interested in doing this, but a lot of them have, ideas of new projects to implement. And I think that supporting them, even if it looks like, or if you think that it's just going to be a waste of time or a waste of money, if you support them in implementing that first event that they thought of, then you've won their loyalty forever, right? I think that they're going to really learn from that experience, and you're really investing in that person, and that then you can kind of ask them to kind of volunteer in ways that you want.
I think when it comes to like building a welcoming culture, it's about seeking first to understand and then be understood, agreeing to disagree, but also like valuing the differences, right? Like it's not the goal should never be, oh, we should agree on everything, but embracing the fresh perspectives and the valuable experiences of everybody, and then daring to do things differently, right? I think you may be in for a positive surprise, but really embracing that like risk taking culture, and realizing that young people will make mistakes, right? But so does everyone. Like it's not just young people who are making the mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and so it's like really setting that tone, and that culture is about having those open, frank conversations, and really allowing yourself to be open to new processes.
Thank you everyone so much for sharing your perspectives, and thank you for our attendees who are still with us. I want to just really emphasize that today's webinar is really just one step in your youth engagement journey, and so I encourage you to check out the handout that we've included here, 10 ways to engage underrepresented youth. There's also a few tools that I'd highlighted throughout the slide deck itself. I'll quickly just share here. A reminder about our second part of the webinar series that we have coming up on Tuesday, July 10th from 11 to 12:30 p.m., looking at youth-centered approaches to meaningful engagement with evaluation. Katie, I'll pass it back over to you if there's any other housekeeping issues you'd like to share.
Just a thank you, Steph, to you, JJ, Adam, and Lena for sharing your knowledge with us today, to everyone who joined us for this conversation. A reminder that you will find the slides as well as the fact sheet that Steph mentioned in the handouts tab on your control panel. And we will also be sure to have those available with the archived webinar on our website at youthrex.com and at exchange.youthrex.com, where you can find so many resources to support your work with young people. And we hope that you will register for part 2 on July 10th. We look forward to continuing the conversation. And thanks again, everyone, for being with us today.